Hi everybody, welcome to today's lesson in POS 201, Introduction to Politics. Today we're going to be discussing traditional theories in global politics. So in thinking about traditional theories of global politics, we need to first look at when we first begin to study international relations in a formal, scholarly way. And so the formal study of international relations really begins after the First World War. What we had seen in the First World War was that industrialization and technological advances in weaponry had made this really the most devastating war in history up to that particular point. And that, in and of itself, prompted a search for a new and stable world order, and one of the most prominent lines of thought at this time was a scholarly idea that we label today as liberal institutionalism. This is a very liberal kind of thought that was headed by the President of the United States at the time, President Woodrow Wilson. He suggested that democracies are inherently peaceful, and if all governments were democratic, war could be eliminated. So liberalism has a very optimistic view of human nature. The suggestion is that peace is possible. Human beings are capable of progress. All we need to do is we need to provide human beings with the right institutions to help guide their behavior to become more progressive and more peaceful. So out of this line of thought came a proposal for the League of Nations. This was a proposal by Woodrow Wilson, and the idea was that this would be a general association of nation states that would cooperate together and would guarantee national sovereignty and peace in the international system. So we have the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War. It creates the League of Nations, but unfortunately, it also enacted very harsh war reparations against Germany at the time, and that's going to become important as in the build up to the Second World War. We also have the promotion of the idea of national self determination. The idea is that states should have the right to freely determine their own policies and practices. Citizens should have the right to determine their own government, and that if there's a nationalist movement within a country that wants, it's tied to this idea of the nation, that individuals and nations, particular um, individuals who view themselves as having a common collective identity and history, that they should be able to form whatever type of government that they would like to form for themselves. And so there was also seen the right of nationalist movements to secure their own autonomy and form a new sovereign state. At the same time, liberalism, this form of liberalism was seen as highly idealistic. It was viewed as being too optimistic about human nature, and the League of Nations ultimately was viewed as ineffective and a failure because the League of Nations, first of all, failed to prevent World War II or the rise of Hitler in Germany. It failed to prevent the militarization of Japan throughout the first half of the 20th century, which, of course, the United States then went to war with Japan in the 1940s. And it generally failed to prevent the rise of fascism in Germany and Italy. There was a growing sense that liberal idealists failed to recognize the realities of power politics. What we see is that World War II was the most destructive war in human history, even to this day. Over 50 million people were killed, and it was largely perceived as partly as a failure of liberal institutionalism. Realists then emerged purporting to explain the world as it really is rather than how we wish it was. So realism emerges as a scholarly school of thought in the 20th century, but it draws on philosophy from as far back as ancient Greece, as well as the Renaissance. And the basic idea is that states struggle for power and security in an anarchical system. When the safety of a country is at stake, a ruler should engage in any and all activities necessary, whether or not they're moral, to ensure the survival of the state. And this is the development of what we describe as national interest and national security, that when the threat of the nation, when the threat of a particular way of life is potentially at stake, it is the responsibility of any ruler, of any political leader, to engage in any and all activities necessary to ensure the survival of the state. This realist turn in international relations draws a lot of inspiration from Thomas Hobbes in The State of Nature, Thomas Hobbes suggests that in the state of nature there is no sovereign power to enforce security justice, or morality, and realists say that this is precisely how the international system functions. There is no sovereign power to regulate the relations between states. Because of that, states live in fear of each other and they seek to become more powerful in order to ensure their own survival. Domination, of course, is the only means to really secure survival, and the result is a constant state of warfare amongst states. This is how realists see the international system. So there's this idea that might makes right. That given the situation of international anarchy, given the fact that we have a situation where states are constantly competing with each other in an attempt to dominate each other, we have a situation where the most powerful end up making the rules, and the weak states must accept rules that are made by powerful states. Realism becomes the predominant mode of study in international relations after the Second World War and during the Cold War in the United States. Realists suggest that some order exists in the international system, but it is a fragile order and it is based on the balance of power. The balance of power is a condition in which no one state has much more power than other states in the system. This balance of power when we have a balance of power between states where no one state is much more powerful than all the rest. This is seen by realists as being a generally stable type of international system because it deters states from engaging in aggressive behavior. In looking at the study of international relations, it's important to point out that there's a debate between whether or not we should examine international relations through a positivist lens or a normative lens. Positivism believes that we can and should study politics in a completely neutral and impartial manner. So we should study politics scientifically and ask ourselves what is, not necessarily what ought to be. And realism is more strongly associated with the positivist mode of analysis. On the other hand, we could also look at normative analysis, and this purposefully asks questions of right and wrong. It, normative analysts suggest that it is impossible to dispassionately test any theory of politics, and any researcher is going to bring their own biases into any study. And liberalism, of course, is often associated with the more normative type of analysis. It asks questions of right and wrong and how we can make relations between nations better. We also have the English school and their presentation of the idea of international society. So it's a meeting of British scholars. They reject the positivist approach that's very popular in the American School of International Relations. They're more interested in historical and normative approaches to international relations, and they emphasize this idea of international society, that a stable order can emerge in international relations. They accept the premise of anarchy, that there's no central governing body in international relations, but they suggest that rules and institutions can alter individual behavior. So related to this English school is the further development of neoliberalism. After the Second World War, liberals began to challenge realists. They say that realism is too simplistic, and they point to many of the international institutions that are created after World War II, such as the United Nations, as evidence that these types of institutions can help facilitate dialogue and prevent war. They also suggest that non-governmental associations like the Red Cross have helped to form a global civil society that also promotes and creates peace. So with neoliberalism, it's important to keep in mind that while realists focus on states and the interactions between states, neoliberals focus on the interplay between states and domestic interests. They're not only looking at the relationships between states, but they're also looking at global civil society. They're looking at the influence of multinational corporations, and they suggest that there's something called interdependence, that both state and non-state actors are connected. This is particularly influential in studies of economics, but the point is that there are many important actors in global politics. It's not just states, that states are interacting with global civil society, they're interacting with multinational corporations. Multinational corporations are interacting with each other. civil society groups are interacting with each other across groups and across nations, and all of these factors are helping to promote peace in the international system. So, in response to neoliberalism, realists reformulate their own theories, and they developed something called neorealism in the late 1970s. It's designed to be a more scientifically grounded approach to the study of realism. And they suggest that the anarchical structure of the international system is what determines how states interact with each other. They suggest that war is likely to occur because no international government can step in to stop it. And classical realists prior to the 1970s had really looked at human nature to explain international politics. They suggested that human beings are essentially greedy. They're always looking for their own self-interest. What makes neorealism a little bit different from that is it doesn't look at human nature per se to explain why we have war. Instead, it says there's no central government that can regulate the relations between nations, and this is the reason why states are constantly going to war with each other. So, with neorealism, the suggestion is that because of anarchy, states must be as powerful as possible to protect their own security. Power is a state's only protection from other states, but this leads to something that realists describe as the security dilemma. States must seek power to protect themselves, but as a state becomes more powerful, it becomes more dangerous to other states in the international system. So, the security dilemma essentially is a situation where a state's own efforts become more powerful, make that state more dangerous to other states in the international system. So that's going to do it for today's lesson. Do be sure to post any questions that you might have over the lecture today, and do also be sure to submit to take the quiz for this week. Thanks.